I want to direct your attention, again, brothers and sisters, to Job chapter 42. And I'll be reading verses 1 through 6, verse 10 through 17. And when I give my great appreciation to these brothers behind me who are such a blessing to us on today, thank God for them. Also, my appreciation to our ushers and ambassadors, to those working technicians upstairs. I see Brother Terry and Sister Evan, Sister Sylvia. Thank you all. Job chapter 42, verses 1 through 6, then verses 10 through 17. Then Job answered the Lord, I know that you can do all things, and that no purpose of yours can be thwarted. Who is this that hides counsel without knowledge? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you declare to me. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. I had heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Verse 10, and the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Then there came to him all his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before, and they ate bread with him in his house. They showed him sympathy and comforted him for all the evil the Lord had brought upon him, and each of them gave him a piece of money and a gold ring. The Lord blessed the latter days of Job more than his beginning, and he had 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 donkeys. Translated, he had a Learjet, a summer house in the Hamptons, and a lot of servants. He also had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He named his first daughter Jemimah, the second Keziah, and the third Karen Hapuk. And in all the land there were no women so beautiful as Job's daughters, and their father gave them an inheritance along with their brothers. And after this, Job lived 140 years and saw his children and his children's children 4 generations. And Job died old and full of days. For a few moments this morning, I'd like to talk with you from the subject, the teacher learns. The teacher learns. Doubtless, most of us have heard this idiotic idiom, if you will, those who can do and those who can't teach. Have y'all heard that before? If you heard that, put your hand. Those who can do and those who can't teach. What shall we make of this pejorative statement? First, in my opinion, brothers and sisters, it is anti-intellectual. It belittles thought and knowledge acquisition that makes teachers able to share what it is that they know. Second, this statement, those who can do and those who can't teach, is not factual. It is a lie. Teachers are doers. As a matter of fact, their doing is on par with the doing at the center of every profession. I know few people who work harder than teachers. Do I have a witness here today? To prepare their lessons, to grade papers, to crank out syllabi, to counsel students, to deal with foolish parents and administrators. All right, there's one teacher here today. And to encourage excellence in us all. Third, this statement is foolish, those who can do, those who can't teach, because there is no doing without teaching, and no teaching without doing. Where would we be without teachers? I thought about this. Somebody had to teach me how to chew my food. Somebody had to teach me how to use a fork and a spoon and a knife, and I'm still having problems with that. Somebody had to teach me how to speak, how to walk, how to dress, how to read, how to make subjects and verbs agree, how to write, how to drive, how to live, how to love, how to worship, how to preach, how to lead. Everything that I think I know how to do, somebody had to teach it to me. Do I have any witnesses here today that without teaching, there is no doing? And without doing, there is no teaching. But you all know that we can't leave it there. Teaching has within it the seeds of its own destruction. Those who are non-reflective teachers, who are not humble in their teaching, can become arrogant. Teachers who do not understand that they do not own knowledge, but they share knowledge that they have acquired for a season, are dangerous teachers. Teachers who think that the world connected to their field of study depends on their lectures, their insight, their books, and their brilliance are also dangerous. It is a very, 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 very short walk from the lectern or the pulpit to the river where Narcissus looked in and fell in love with his own reflection. And this happens at every level. It happens in the professoriate. It happens in the pastorate. But it also happens among farmers and mechanics and engineers and architects. You all know these kinds of teachers. They know everything. This is the farmer whose squash is always bigger than your squash and will tell you what you are doing wrong by way of fertilizer and where you have positioned your garden and the pH balance of your soil, because your stuff is just not quite as good as theirs. This is the mechanic you know that knows where to get every part and can tell you where what you are trying to take care of on the vehicle is wrong and where they are always right. This is the pastor who, while having very little success in his own ministry, can tell you exactly what to do to make your ministry better. This is the businessman who himself is broke but is trying to advise you about your investments. This is the physician who does not take care of himself or herself, but they're telling you how to get your body in perfect shape. This is the attorney who himself has never won a case, giving you a strategy when you go before Ted Newman and Clayton Aarons. These are they who know everything without humility, without reflection. They are clear that they are experts. I'd like to share a story with you about a pastor with whom I served years ago. I will not call his name because somebody in here is his cousin, I'm sure. But no matter what we were talking about, brothers, he was an expert in everything. We talked about space travel. He had been an astronaut. We talked about firefighting. He had been a chief of a fire department in a small city in Florida. We talked about cooking, and he was a gourmet. We talked about singing. He had won a Grammy Award. We talked about writing. He had received a Pulitzer Prize. No matter what we mentioned, he was an expert. He knew everything. And I want to caution those of us here today, no matter what your level of educational attainment may be, let me say something to you that is not that profound. You don't know everything. And I remember recently I went to our bishop in jest to share with him something. And he said, Bill, we sent you to school, but you don't know everything. And until someone teaches you that you do not know everything, you remain deficient as both a teacher and a student. What I did not realize until dusting off more of Job's story, Sister Diane Little, is that buried in Job's curriculum vitae, in his resume, is the fact that Job did indeed for a time serve as a teacher. You look at Job chapter 4, verses 3 through 5. Job's friend Eliphaz the Temanite says to Job, "See, you have instructed many people. You have strengthened the hands of the weak. Your words have supported those who were stumbling, and you have made firm the feeble knees. But now it has come to you, and you are impatient. It touches you, and you are dismayed." He says to Job, "Job, when you were teaching, you were all right. When people came to you and you could instruct them in prayer and in worship and in liturgy and in homiletics, you could tell them all that you knew about God and about how God worked. You could tell them about sin and forgiveness and making offerings of penitence before God for both your own sins and the sins of your children and your community. You could share with them, Job, when you were teaching, how God had blessed you with cattle and oxen and sheep and servants because you were righteous, because you were good, because you beat everybody to the church house, because you paid your tithes and offerings, because you were the man that everybody wanted on their board. You were the man that every woman wanted as her husband. You were the man that every child wanted as their father. You supported those who had stumbled. You lifted up those who had feeble knees. But Job, now you're no longer the teacher, but you are in the school of hard knocks. Now you are no longer the one with all the answers, but everything difficult, everything ugly, everything dark and dismal has fallen upon you, Job. And now that everything you used to talk about has knocked on your door, what is left? Now that you who were expert in everything find yourself looking into the abyss of death and destruction, what is left? The friend says, now that what you taught about has touched you, you are dismayed and broken. If, as my grandmother says, you keep saying good morning, you will reach the limits of your own knowledge. I wonder if there's anybody here who's already reached the limits of your own knowledge in some ways in your life, that you thought you knew something until that happened. You thought you knew people until that person did that thing to you. You thought you knew your body until you got up this morning and couldn't move right, couldn't move left, couldn't bend your knees or your elbows. You thought you understood finances until that calamity came to you. And most important for those of us who try our best to ground our lives in God, we thought we knew God until that thing happened. We thought we knew God's character and God's love and God's justice and God's providential care until that thing happened to us. I wonder today, is there anybody here who has had that thing happen to you? Come on, somebody bear witness with me this morning that you have had that thing happen to you that brought into question everything you trusted, everything you knew, everything that defined you, everything that you loved, everything that you exalted. All of it came into question when that thing came to you. That thing has come near to Job, and we're at the end of the book, and Job is located in wisdom literature, trying to teach human beings something about how we ought to live and how we ought to orient ourselves to God and to other people. What Job is saying here at the end of the book is that God, I had been a teacher. I had been confident in my own knowledge, in my own epistemological sophistication. I was depending on what I knew and my own philosophies and my own theology. But something happened in my life that made everything that I had ever believed in, everything I'd ever prayed for, it was bankrupt. And the problem with people of faith is when that thing happens, many of us are too proud to admit that we have reached the point
of theological and faith bankruptcy. We're still trying to pray the same bankrupt prayers and preach the same bankrupt sermons and sing the same bankrupt songs and getting advice for the same bankrupt people that in their situation of bankruptcy, they can't get out of chapter 11 or chapter 13, and they talking to you. When you reach the point of bankruptcy in your faith, as Job reached it, then I'm going to give you permission. I believe the permission is divine to say, God, everything I knew prior to this moment, it no longer works. Everything I believed prior to this moment now cannot assist me, cannot aid me. And here is where true faith begins to work. When you lose that parent unexpectedly, when you lose that child unexpectedly, when your reputation is destroyed by rumor and in your window, when you reach the point of bankruptcy, then what God wants you to do is to close that account and to look at new ways of trusting and believing in God. What I like about Job is he no longer leaned on stuff that did not work, but he trusted God to take him to new places. Anybody here want to trust God to take you beyond where you are and what you struggle with and how you've been down and out? Is anyone here who knows that our God is doing a new thing? And what I'm convinced about is some of the old stuff that we have been carrying around, we need to drop it and leave it alone. Every now and then you need to go back to the old landmark, but sometimes you need to forget how you got there. Job is willing to admit that all of my pious pronouncements are no longer any good. Job is willing to wrestle with God in the pit of death and despair. And let me share just a few more things with you. Did you know that the people who call themselves the chosen of God, Israel, that name does not mean those who love God? It does not mean those who have sweet, kissy-face feelings about God. It does not mean those who sing pretty songs about God and dance about God and shout about God and speak in tongues about God. That name Yisrael means those who wrestle with God, those who contend with God, those who fight with God. And I believe part of the reason that we're still in this church is because our ancestors wrestled with God. In the midst of the realities that they found in this space, they did not relent, but they kept on wrestling with God. And I want to share with somebody today, I don't know your situation, but I do know mine, and I know everybody's got something that they're wrestling with. If you are wrestling, you are in the right place, because we come not to surrender, not to give up, not to pack up and walk away, but we come to wrestle with God and to stay in the ring with God until God shows us that God has not abandoned us. Listen to what God in Job discourse. Job says to God, listen, I had to leave everything that I knew behind. I had to abandon everything the preacher told me and the Sunday school teacher told me, and I had to get to know you for myself. Listen to what Job says. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was trying to talk about stuff too wonderful for me, too great for me, beyond the ability of humans to comprehend. And I know, he says, what the preacher used to say and what the Sunday school teacher said and what my granddaddy and my grandmama said. That's what my ears have heard. But now I have seen you for myself. Is there anybody in Metropolitan today who's moved beyond what somebody told you about God, and you have seen God for yourself? You've seen his hand of mercy. You've seen his power in the midst of your own life. Just a couple of more things and I'm going to sit down. First of all, Job's deliverance and restoration did not happen after he got all his family and his stuff back. The restoration began while he was still in the storm. Oh, did you hear that? He was being restored while he was still in the midst of the whirlwind. And here is how we know that Job has been restored. He says to God, I heard of you by the ear, but now I see you, and I've got to back up and recalibrate. I've got to back up and reimagine who you are every now and then because of the way that life is lived and because of what happens to us. We got to back up and recalibrate. Anybody here ever been like me? I don't know how to get anywhere in Washington. I know how to get my hair cut and buy some food. Anything else, I get lost. I depend upon GPSs. And have you ever noticed when you are going about and your GPS says recalculating? Somebody here needs to recalculate your relationship with God because you're about to hit a dead end and you need to recalculate. And what I have determined is this GPS, by some miracle of modern technology, when I'm getting lost, it will take me back around so I can get to the place that I'm trying to get to as my destination. Somebody here needs to know today that if you hit a dead end, God can help you to recalculate. That if you hit a bad situation, God can help you to recalculate, but you got to be willing to move in a new direction. If you hit the dead end, you ain't going to get where you're trying to get moving through it. So Job's restoration comes in the midst of the storm. And finally, we could spend a whole lot of time, and I'm very hesitant to talk about everything that was restored to Job, because this is normally where everybody gets happy, because it gives us what we all lust for, and that is a happy ending. But somebody here knows that life ain't going to always give you no happy ending. Some of y'all been waiting for your happy ending a long time, and it still ain't come. What I can promise you today is not happy endings, but I can promise you a God whose presence will surprise you. And so Job is surprised by the way that God restores. And notice what Job does. Now, there is a problem with his sexual politics, and here in this text talks about how beautiful his daughters were, and that's problematic, and I agree with the interpreters on that. But what they say here is that Job does something that men of his day did not do. I want you to take a look. It's buried there in verse 15. It's buried there in verse 15 of chapter 42. After Job has gone through everything that he has gone through and experienced everything and recalibrated and recalculated his relationship with God, after the teacher has been taught, Job then does something that men of that day did not do. The text says Job gave an inheritance to his daughters. Do you see that? That after God has brought you through a storm, you don't act like other folk act. You don't do the conventional thing, but after God brings you through a storm, you break the rules. You start blessing people that other folk would ignore. After God brings you through the storm, you give your daughters the same that you gave to your sons, because you know that God loves everybody and is no respecter of persons. After you've been through the storm, you move beyond what people look like and sound like and bless them because they are agents of God and they are made in the image and the likeness of God. Some of us have gone through the storm and have neglected to do what Job has done on the other end, and that is to be God's agent of mercy and grace and love wherever you find yourself. If you have come through a storm, when you sit in that meeting, don't let them folk be mean and cut out folk and not give them what it is that they deserve. God put you there, and you came through the storm so that you could be a blessing. When you come through the storm and God has blessed you to have a little food in your cabinet, a little bit of meat in your freezer, fix a meal for somebody else and bless them as they go through their storm. If you have come through the storm and you got a few dollars in your pocket, then stand up and find somebody like David did in 2 Samuel. Is there somebody of the house of Saul upon whom I may show mercy? After you have come through the storm, then bless somebody and love somebody and lift somebody up. There are too many of us who have come through the storm and we just so happy to be out of the storm. We sitting down with all the seat belts fastened, trying to make sure that nothing else happens to us. God ain't get you through that storm so you could sit there talking about you got through the storm. God got you through the storm so you could go everywhere else that people find themselves in storms to say, he got me out, and I'm here to bear witness to you that if he did it for me, he's able to do it for you. Is there anybody here today that is your testimony, that God did it for you and you believe that God can do it for somebody else? Brother Robinson and I were talking about a great servant of our church who died, presiding over John Gillison from South Carolina. And he was a great, 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 great man. Beautiful spirit. Love to hear him talk and preach and share. And I'm thinking right now about his eulogy of Clemente Pinckney, the young pastor who was massacred at Mother Emanuel along with 8 of his parishioners. And what Presiding Elder Gillison said, and you can go to YouTube and watch, I think that his was the most eloquent eulogy delivered on that day. I'm sorry for those of you who thought it was the president's. No, it wasn't the president, it was Presiding Elder Gillison. And what Presiding Elder Gillison said about Clemente Pinckney is, after this young life was snuffed out, he said to the wife and daughters that God would take care of them. And that's a bold statement when the blood of father is on the floor, the basement of Mother Emanuel Church. And then he said he knew that God would take care of them because God is somebody we know. God is an entity. God is a being whom we know keeps promises. Anybody here know God keeps promises? And this is the last thing he said, and I watched it just the other day. I kept playing it, Brother Robinson, because I wanted to hear his voice again. He said that when he was at Allen University as a student, the choir would sing this amazing rendition of a song our mothers and fathers bequeathed to us in that musical literature we call the sorrow songs or the Negro spirituals. It's a song that goes like this: Lord, I done what you told me to do. You told me to preach, and I did it. You told me to love, and I did it. You told me to share and to encourage and to live, to work for peace and for justice, and I did it. What Job is asking us today, have we done what the Lord told us to do? Post-storm, have we learned the lessons that God is asking us to learn? Are we prepared to be ambassadors after the storm, to go to those who are in the storm and to declare to them that God is able? Lord, I done what you told me to do. Everybody on your feet. Will you ask somebody next to you, would you ask them, have you done what the Lord told you to do? All right, I want to make you more uncomfortable. Ask somebody else, have you done what the Lord told you to do? The doors of the church are open, my brothers and sisters. The doors of the church are open because there are some teachers here today who need to become students. The doors of the church are open today because there's some of us who have come through the eye of the storm, and God is pushing us back out, calling us to be a blessing, to be a servant, to be a deliverer, to be a healer, to be an agent of God's justice and peace. I want you to come to a church today where we have not figured everything out, but we do know a God who is able. And we say like those 3 Hebrew boys, even if God don't do it, we glad to know he can. Look at somebody and say, even if he doesn't, I'm glad to know he can, even if he doesn't. And so the doors of the church open. We're waiting on you. Maybe you're looking for a fellowship where people don't think we know everything, and we don't, but you want to be a part of a house of folks who are learning, who are willing to adjust our theology and philosophy, who are willing to say, God, I thought I knew what I was talking about because I talked about what I had heard, but now that I have seen you, I know something different about you, and I want to live differently. I want to love differently. I want to give differently. I want to share differently. I want a new song. I don't want a new walk. I want a new talk. As the choir sings, the doors of the church open, would you come today?